Hello and welcome back. This is Penny Sansevieri with Author Marketing Experts, and this is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. And I have to say, this is so much fun. We're having so much fun doing this podcast, and some of you have reviewed it, and we love to see reviews. And we're also going to start doing some really fun promotion stuff, some promo things that we offer, and some really cool tools for marketing. One of them that I'm going to have Amy talk about in just a second is why aren't you selling more books? Because she does all of these assessments, and the authors seem to really love them. Amy, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much.
So you love the Sell More Books assessments, right? I mean, you do a ton of those.
I really do. And it's one of those things where it's like I get actually a little anxious right before I start them because there's so much to cover and so many important key elements to an author's brand and their platform. And you want to make sure you touch on all of them. But once I get going, it really is. I love doing it because it's amazing how much you can uncover. And believe it or not, even the authors that come to us feeling super lost, I don't do anything right, nothing's working, I'm not selling books. It's actually really inspiring because they're almost there on so many things, Penny. Like I always uncover that they're like 75% there for so many things that they could be doing and just knocking it out of the park. So it's really about getting that, second set of eyes, somebody that's not so close to what you're doing to kind of uncover all these different opportunities that you're missing, but just missing by, barely, a few extra efforts or a few tweaks to your website or, how you're pitching bloggers.
Right, exactly, which is what we're going to talk about today. And that's one of the things that I really hope that this podcast brings to light is the fact that sometimes it's not a million things that you need to be doing, but it really need to focus on just these 5 or even just this one, because sometimes that can make all the difference. And that's one of the reasons that I thought this particular show, Upping Your Blogger Game, was really something important to focus on, because as it happens, we're redoing some of our blogger list, and Amy and I have had endless conversations about how much bloggers have changed in terms of what they want to see, how they want to get pitched, all of that kind of stuff. And also, a lot of times, one of the things I get from authors is, I just want to pitch big media, and we're going to address big media in a future podcast. I just want to pitch big media. Why would I want to pitch bloggers? Why do I care if a blogger wants to review my book? And Amy, we both get this question a lot. I mean, what do you tell authors when they ask you that?
Well, the first thing I remind them is that no successful authors started off with a big name review. That's not how anybody started. That's not how this works, one. And also bloggers they're already thought leaders. They have a built-in network, fan base, and really pitching bloggers and networking with them is basically like introducing you to everybody that's already following them and listening to what they say, taking their recommendations. I mean, it's really quite brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. And, this follows the idea that people like what other people like. So bloggers are, the whole multiple impressions piece of this is important when it comes to pitching bloggers, because the more impressions you get for your book, the more likely people are to buy it. And authors ask me all the time, what sells books? And I will tell them, we don't really know. I mean, it's not that we don't really know. There isn't one thing. Like if that question is, are you looking for the answer at the end of that question? What's the one thing? What's the golden, Willy Wonka ticket? There is no golden ticket. It is multiple impressions to your book, message, or product to get people, to buy. And so the right kind of blogger pitching is exactly, finding the right bloggers for your book is a great way to find and amplify your message and find a bigger market.
And Penny, I think what you said about people liking what other people like is a really good point, especially with bloggers, because honestly, bloggers are so much more relatable than big media in so many ways. These people have already established a rapport with their followers. They understand that their personality is already out there, their likes, their dislikes. And I think their opinion, a blogger saying that they really enjoyed a book or that this book was a fabulous resource for X, Y, and Z reasons, I really think is going to encourage more people to buy than having a feature in a big magazine. You know what I mean? It's the personal connection that people have with these bloggers and what they think of their opinions is really golden.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It really is golden. And, one of the things that has changed, though, in the 20 years that I've been in business is how we're going to talk about how to find bloggers, but also, how to connect with them, because it's no longer always a matter of, oh, I'm just going to put this pitch together and pitch them all in one email and then I'm done. Because Amy, you and I both had experience with that.
Oh yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah, spoiler alert, it just doesn't work.
Right, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about finding bloggers, because, as I said a few minutes ago, I'm in the middle of redoing a lot of our blogger lists just because they need to be refreshed every so often as we're going after and pitching bloggers, and even bloggers that we've had, long relationships with. Sometimes they go on hiatus. And especially right now, as we're recording this in the middle of a pandemic, which may be over by the time you're listening to this podcast. But, well, I was talking to a blogger this morning and she said, it's taken me a lot longer to get to my email because now I'm working from home. I'm teaching my kids from home and my time has become really compressed. So you want to, before you go out and you pitch a blogger, you want to make sure that they actually have the time to take on your book, which we'll talk about in just a second. But blogger directories, Amy, when we're looking for bloggers, if we don't have an existing list for that particular market, and a lot of times this happens for something that's really niche, we find a lot of bloggers on blogger directories, even doing, a Google search for example, romance book bloggers, and it usually pulls up some. But beyond that, where else can people find good bloggers to pitch to?
A lot of times, sure, you can definitely, and I use this strategy where you search for, genre name book blogger.
Sure.
That's a very straightforward way to start. But then you also want to think about, where are these people hanging out? Where do they get their information? And sometimes it's not as obvious as people would think. So you really have to get creative and think about who you're ideally selling your book to, and think about where they're spending time online, and getting creative about making a connection between what you have to offer and what kind of content and what kind of site that blogger runs.
Right. And what kind of things do you, but in particular, what kind of things do you look for a blog that is maybe willing to accept a particular book that we're pitching them?
Sure. Obviously, you want to make sure that they're active. If they're not active every day, that's fine. That's a lot of work, but I think consistency shows a lot too. So if you're noticing that they feature a new book once a week, even once a month, and they've been doing that on a consistent schedule, that's a really good sign. And I also like to see that they're really passionate about what they do and the topics that they cover. Penny, you've seen them before, that there are blogs that literally just feature a synopsis of a book and a cover image, whatever, and that's really all that they do. And not that you can't get some decent exposure from there, but that blogger's not necessarily making a personal recommendation. So you really want to go for a mix. If you find that blog and they want to take your book, that's great. Never turn that down. But you really want to push for a mix, I think, of coverage as well. So book spotlights, features, reviews, guest pieces, interviews, things like that. I think you have to get creative about what you want as well, and not always going, I want a review, I want a review, I want a review.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One of the other things that I want to mention too is when you're so as I'm going through and revetting our existing lists, I'm checking for things like you mentioned. Are they still consistently blogging? Like if we haven't pitched them in a while for something, maybe they've dropped off and we haven't checked in with them recently. So I'm looking for, are they still consistently reviewing books? And I'm checking their review guidelines. It's the first thing that I will do when I go to a blog is I'll check and see if they have done something, if they've done either a book spotlight or a review recently, and then I'll go over to their review guidelines and I will read those very thoroughly. And sometimes they're a little tricky, but I really recommend that as you are trying to find bloggers to pitch your book, check the review guidelines. Do not willy-nilly pitch bloggers just because, oh, this is something that, they'll probably be interested in, because when you check the review, the submission guidelines, you may find out that there's something that they're, for other reasons that they may not be particularly interested in your specific, like, paranormal mystery. And we'll talk about tracks and different markets and different tracks in just a second. But the other thing, though, too, that I want to encourage you is, and as somebody who has done a ton of research on bloggers over the years, don't go too far down the rabbit hole. So when you find blogger directories, when you find a list of, oh, these are great places to pitch bloggers, it's very easy to get lost in this research. And one blog, then you get onto a blog and then you look at their blog roll and they're connected to other bloggers. And before you know it, 6 hours of your day has passed and you've still only built up a list of, maybe 10 people because you're winding down this blogger road. So what I recommend is stay really focused. And the goal is to try to find 15 to start with. Find 15 that are really solid, because you can always add to this list. And then when you add to it incrementally, like 5 bloggers at a time, because blogger pitching these days takes a little bit more effort. Again, it's not just a point and shoot kind of a thing. So Amy, I want to talk a little bit about markets, because markets, and you are the one that you and I always have lots and lots of conversations about markets when we're putting together marketing proposals for authors and market segments. Because, like, let's say, for example, an author has a fiction book, that features a time jump, right? So that could be under science fiction or fantasy. And if I were to, let's say, send you this and say, Amy, where do you think that this author should get pitched? Like, when I talk to this particular person, and the book is really terrific, but when I talked to this particular person, they said, oh, I would really like to pitch this to bloggers who feature time jump, right?
Right.
And you and I both know that just doesn't exist.
Right. You're not going to find bloggers by searching for that realistically.
Right. So in that case, talk to me a little bit about the markets that you're sort of seeing, and specific, how finite these markets actually even get anymore.
Right. It's gotten very competitive. So as you mentioned, you really want to start looking for either science fiction or fantasy, depending on other elements that are in your book, and you should know this if you've done your market research. But honestly, Penny, starting broad is the reality. You start broad with your broader genre, and that's where, touching back on what you said about paying very close attention to what these individual bloggers like, that's where you're going to find those exact right people that like time jump and things like that. Because believe it or not, bloggers will mention that on their sites, but finding them that way is hard. And that's where the due diligence comes in, is that getting in there and actually reading what their preferences are for the subgenres and kind of, niche storylines that they like to get into. And you'll also, as you've seen, they will also be very honest about things they are not interested in.
Oh, yeah.
So if for any reason they're not interested in something, an element that is prevalent in your book, don't force it on them, because that's going to be a waste of your time and a waste of their time as well.
Right, exactly. And the other piece of this is that if there is something, so we have an author that we just absolutely love, and I pitched him this morning, or I pitched him yesterday to a blogger group. And by group, I mean there are several reviewers that are attached to this one particular blog. And I was very clear on the various elements in this book, right? I was very clear that there was paranormal, that this is a thriller, so that the blogger could then tell me, this is my bag, I really like this. Or in this case, what he said was, you know what, I'm not such a fan of thrillers with paranormal twists, but my blogger buddy on this site is, and I'll forward this to him and see if he has time to review it. So be really honest, because the last thing that you want to do, especially, hopefully most of you don't just have one book in you. You probably have more in you. Be really clear on the elements that are in the book so that the blogger can make a determination. Because conversely, you may also find a blogger who says, well, I really only like thrillers with a paranormal twist. And if you haven't mentioned it, then then you've lost out.
Exactly.
And yeah, because we find that a lot too. And it gets really tricky, Amy. I mean, in terms of, market segments, I mean, you want to be, and we're going to talk about nonfiction in just a second, but you want to be really clear in your pitch, which we're going to talk about in another podcast specific about pitching bloggers. You want to be really clear about what your anchor elements are, what the pieces are that really make this book complete, like paranormal thriller.
Exactly. Because you want to make the decision easy for them. Even if the decision is no, thank you, you're going to get most bloggers will take the time to give you some valuable feedback about why not, you know what I mean? And that'll really help your research and refining your list as well. Because, if you give them specifics, like your experience, Penny, they reply, they say, you know what, this isn't my deal, but my blogger colleague, and you make those notes on your list, and you're really going to refine what you do going forward by doing that.
Yeah.
But if you're vague about what your book is about, they don't want to think that hard to find the next book that they could potentially just love. Nobody wants to think that hard anymore. And
right.
Being honest makes the decision that much easier, and it's a better use of your time and their time.
Well, I think it's also just about making their lives a little bit easier, right? So, you're gonna make sure that you're not underselling or overselling something that might offend them, or that might not be in their wheelhouse, or whatever that is. But now for our nonfiction folks, I mean, nonfiction typically, is easier to pitch for media because there's an obvious hook. But a lot of authors say to me, I don't really know where to pitch my nonfiction book to bloggers, because I don't have any idea of what, who these bloggers are, and, where they, how to even get to them, or who I would even target for this. But the thing is, there are lots and lots of nonfiction bloggers. Some of them may have their own books, some of them have their own products and whatnot, but still, there's a lot of opportunity. It's just really about being clear. And Amy and I, again, we have lots of conversations on this. So in this, I talked to an author this week who had a book that was really tethered to the political reader. So anybody who likes to read, not necessarily political theory, or, setting legislation, or anything that necessarily complex, but somebody who just really likes a good nonfiction political book. And one of the things that he asked me, because he said, a lot of college students are becoming so much more political, could we pitch this to the college market? And I told him, straight up front, that might be a good second tier approach, because we could certainly go after university newspapers and, local media in high, big university markets. But you really, and again, you and I have talked about this so much, you have to get really careful how narrow that you get, because you're not going to find bloggers that are going to necessarily cater to that narrow a market. I mean, Amy, would you agree?
Yes, that you're going to end up spending a lot of time researching and not coming up with a lot of results if you get really specific about, this is who my reader is, and I need bloggers or, websites that are catering to just this person. I mean, that's not the reality anymore. And so saying, I want a type of blogger because it fits my category on Amazon, also not a thing anymore. This goes back to knowing who your reader and your potential buyer is, and thinking about, where do they go online to find information, to find news, to find lifestyle tips, product recommendations, career guidance, whatever it is, topic that you specialize in. Think about where they're going to find that information. And I think you'll find that a lot of those blogs and websites, and I think that's something that people get hung up on too, Penny, with nonfiction, like a lot of these sites that we pitch aren't set up like traditional blogs, but they're still, a very good resource that you might want to pitch. But so, yeah, you want to think about where college age students are getting their information right now, and then pitching yourself to those places and making that connection between what you have to offer and why it would benefit their readers, and their followers. And that's where you start, those light bulbs start going off for those site owners and managers.
Yeah, that's really where they start to make the connection. And what we know, we all know the term the low hanging fruit, right? So going after the most obvious markets, and it's not a bad thing necessarily to have really aggressive goals for your marketing and for your pitching, but all of it, if you're going to do it in a thoughtful way, all of it just takes a lot of time, and you can build one on another. And we do this when, Amy, we've worked with some authors through multiple books, and have the first tier of pitching gets complete, and then we go into the next, and then we start to target some of those more narrow markets, that once the bigger markets are, have been pitched, have been accomplished.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get any marketing done, honestly, Penny, when you look at your entire to-do list, because it just gets overwhelming.
Oh, sure.
So you really want to start focused, do a handful of things. This is definitely a marathon and not a sprint. And timing is so important with blogger and media pitching also. So it really doesn't serve you well to tap into every single resource you have in one weekend and then sit there and twiddle your thumbs.
Right. Right. Exactly. No, that's very true. But the other piece of that that's really important is relationships. Because when it comes to bloggers, when it comes to anybody really, it's about relationships. And we talk a lot about that in the show, the relationship with the reader and the relationship with the blogger. And it's not necessarily that you have to be sending them a birthday card or a holiday card or a Christmas card or whatever. It's really just about showing them a little bit of love. So maybe following them on social, sharing some of the posts that they do, commenting on other, books that they've reviewed in a way that is like, oh my gosh, I like this review because of XYZ, or it's prompted me to get the book, or whatever that is. But getting to, making some kind of an effort to get to know them it's virtual networking. And I always write, and that's one of the reasons why I say don't get a list of 100 bloggers unless you want to spend all day long following them on social and retweeting or sharing or commenting on their Instagram. But showing just a little bit of love is really a good way to build a relationship with bloggers.
That's so true. You talked about the quality impressions when we kicked off the show. And so in the same way you need to make quality impressions with potential buyers of your book, you also need to make quality impressions with the people you want to help spread the word about your book. And that's where, that virtual networking that you just covered really comes in handy. After a little bit, they will probably start to recognize your name. On their social, sharing their work, commenting on their blog. Don't take it into the stalker zone. Like, don't get too crazy with it. But honestly, anything you do genuinely will really shine through.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, not to sing our praises, but that's where we spend, as marketing professionals, we know that a lot of our relationships with these bloggers and with the media in general is really important. That's really where we are, we're building. So we're not going to send them books that aren't right for them. We're not going to send them super long, windy pitches, which we're going to talk about in the next show. You really, you have to remember that it's a relationship. And if you're writing in the same genre, it's a relationship that you are going to carry through from book to book to book. So now that you have your blogger list together, and we talked about, if you want to target 100, that's great. Start with 15. Start with 20, start with 15, start with a smaller number so that you can, get not so far down the rabbit hole that all you're doing is finding bloggers. But in terms of the return on how many reviews like if you pitch 15 bloggers, you're not going to get 15 reviews. And Amy, you and I talk about this too when we put together marketing proposals for authors, in terms of you have to really kind of over pitch in order to get bloggers to pay attention because they might just be busy, or maybe they're just not, they're not able to review your book because they have a whole stack of to be reads, and you're waiting forever to get a review.
Right. Timing can be everything. And that's another great reason why you don't just want to hammer through the entire list you've spent, hours researching in one weekend, because timing is so important. And then if you touch everybody once, then, how many more times can you realistically check in with them, So you really want to be strategic about this as well, because you do want to be networking with bloggers on a regular basis. And if you talk to everybody 1 month, you've really, okay, that's one touch. Like, you really only have so many more times where you can reach out to them, before you've kind of reached the end of that, unless they start engaging with you back.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the things that I really suggest is every time that you get a blogger review, every time that some blogger, even book spotlights, book excerpt, author interview, whatever it is, you got to share it. You got to comment on it. You've got to thank them publicly in the comment, thank them in email, obviously, but you got to share it on your social. And that's really important. One of the other things that I also want to mention too, is that a lot of authors that come to us say, I want to pitch this book to bookstagrammers, right? And Amy is probably rolling her eyes because she and I have had lots of conversations about bookstagrammers. But, a lot of these bloggers are bookstagrammers, right? And if you don't know what bookstagrammers are, it's a hashtag on Instagram, and it's a series of book lovers. I mean, Amy, maybe you can explain it better, that really love books and get a lot of momentum for the books that they promote.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it. It's book lovers on Instagram, and they've kind of created their own little community, and it's really cool, actually.
It's really cool. And I know Reese Witherspoon is big in the Bookstagrammer community, and I think that's how it originally got so much attention. But a lot of these bloggers, and part of the reason why I recommend that you read through their review terms, many of these bloggers, they are either top Amazon reviewers or they're Bookstagrammers, and they're both. So be looking out for that as you are pitching these bloggers. And that's why I say, start with a smaller number and add on to that so that you can really do your due diligence. The other thing that I want to mention too is that starting with a smaller number and building onto that is not a bad thing. You can do this incrementally, like you can do 5 1 week and 5 the next week, etc. So media draws media, and bloggers are no different. If you're getting lots of bloggers to review your book, you may get lots more because you're starting to see this book everywhere. And so the perception is that this is a book that everybody's going to like, because you're starting to build that, one thing builds on another. And sometimes it hits all at once. And other times bloggers may take, a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months to review and post the book. But as it starts to appear, it all starts to build on each other.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So one of the things, and Amy, you and I we're gonna talk about this in the next podcast, is pitching bloggers. And that's the big thing. So finding bloggers is one thing. I wanted to make an entire show out of that because I wanted to give it's the right stage, setting the right stage for all of this pitching. But we're going to talk about pitching bloggers, and we're going to talk a little bit more about creating the right kind of a pitch. And Amy does a lot of our pitches, so she's going to talk about that as well. And I want to thank everybody who's reviewed the podcast. And please, 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 if you get a chance, post an honest review. I want to say, hey, give us, because now I'm doing something that I tell other people not to do. Hey, give us a 5-star review. Yay, yes. So, please review the podcast. Absolutely. We love reviews. We love your feedback. You can find me on social. And if you have ideas for shows, absolutely. I'll post my social stuff, where to follow me in the show notes. But we also have the why aren't you selling more books assessment $50 off, and the link and the code will be in the podcast show notes. So we're going to offer that to you folks, and it's an assessment that you really love. Amy does most of them. She loves doing them. She would love to do more, so please.
Let me geek out over your book and your platform. Come on.
Oh my gosh. And she's so good at them. And we get so many authors that come back to us and just say, oh my gosh, I really love these assessments. Because sometimes it's just a matter of, if you don't have the money to hire a publicity firm, sometimes it's just good to have another set of eyes on
100%. Yep.
Yeah, on what you're trying to do. So thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell. We're so pleased to present this podcast for you, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.